Hello and welcome to episode 77 of the Chills at Will podcast. Happy today to have with me Adam O'Fallon Price. Just having finished his The Hotel Neversink, I am steeped in his writing, and he is a heck of a writer. A little bit about him, and this is from the first person point of view. I'm a writer and teacher living in Carborough, North Carolina. The photos on this site, obviously his website, were taken at Grossinger's Catskills Resort Hotel, one of the inspirations for my Edgar Award nominated novel. And this was before it won the award, The Hotel Neversink. I spend too much time on Twitter, don't we all? And my semi weekly books and basketball podcast is called Fans Notes. And now the more formal third person biography. Adam O'Fallon Price is the author of two novels, The Grand Tour, Doubleday 2016, and The Hotel Neversink from Tin House Books 2019. His short fiction has appeared in the Paris Review, Vice, the Kenyon Review Online, Glimmer Train, Narrative, EPOCH, the Iowa Review, and many other places. His essay and criticism have appeared in the Paris Review Daily, Ploughshares, Electric Literature, and The Millions, where he is a staff writer. Adam, thanks so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm trying to get my hair right on the video.
It looks perfect.
Yeah, well,
It
I
looks
don't know. It's
perfect.
a little. I need a trim, but yeah, it's okay.
Remind me of the protagonist's name from the Grand Tour.
Richard Lazar.
Okay, because his hair was spectacular, and I think you've got that. Was he based on you as far as his hair?
No, he had much better hair than I have. Like sort of
Wow.
like fine scraggly hair. He had like that kind of thick gray you know
Pompadour,
kind
I think, or it used to be a pompadour, right?
like leonine head of hair.
Ooh, I want to use the word leonine today in context, but anyways.
Yeah.
So you're in North Carolina. I was speaking to a woman named Danielle Fuentes Morgan. She's a professor and a great writer about satire.
Mhm.
I'm talking to Matt Sullivan, who's written about the Brooklyn Nets and their advocacy. And all of you guys are from North Carolina. Danielle lives in Durham, but she's a Tar Heel for life. Have you been forced to choose? I know you obviously teach at University of North Carolina. Did you have any allegiances going in, and have you totally gone fully into the Tar Heel tradition and history?
Well, I came here in like '94 to go to undergrad to UNC, and I dropped out and I played music and did a bunch of other things, and then I went back in like 2010 or the late 2008 or something. And so I got my undergrad degree from Carolina, and then did an MFA and stuff, and came back here and I got hired by them to teach creative writing. So
Mm,
I'm pretty Tar Heel, uh,
yeah.
whatever, alleged. That's
Can you?
yeah. I'm no. There's no conflict for me.
Okay.
It's
All right.
yeah, it's very
Fair
simple.
enough. Are you?
Yeah,
Is it truly impossible to describe how hoops crazy North Carolina is?
yeah. It's pretty wild. I mean, because I think partly because, and I think this is true of sort of the Louisville,
Mm,
the of Kentucky basketball also, like UK and Louisville and stuff, which I believe has the highest. It's like they always have the highest basketball ratings of like in any
right.
area in the country. But I think it's like we don't really, since we don't have like pro. I mean, we have the Hornets, but like
Hmm.
that's been such a mismanaged kind of franchise, and they're actually interesting now. I'm not going to go on a big NBA thing, but I could, but I'm not. But they Charlotte almost is like feels like it's like a different part of the state, kind of, and it's
Okay.
not. It's like there's nothing really in this area, like the Piedmont Triad or the Triangle, that is like professional basketball. So it's all like these
Hmm.
colleges, and it's dense with colleges. So it's
Right.
very yeah. I think it's a kind of fertile place
Yeah.
for that. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, you see these videos of like March Madness, and it's just packed to the gills, and you're just like, wow, it's just a different
Yeah.
world. So you mentioned Louisville. From your biography, I get that you grew up in all over Louisville,
Mhm.
L.A., even maybe born in L.A., the Netherlands. Was this military, or what was that like as a child? Where did you mostly grow up, or was that all over the place?
Uh, Overseas until I was like 12, and then my dad worked for Aramco, or well, he worked for Shell and Aramco,
Oh,
the oil
okay.
companies, and then he quit and we moved to Tennessee, actually, where they were from. And I went to middle school and high school in Knoxville, and then came to North Carolina for college, and I've kind of lived some other places, but this is sort of like home since I was, 20 or so. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I wonder about your relationship as a kid to language, to reading. I mean, were you the kid who had to get kicked out of the library? Were you somebody who was just all about music at that time? What was your relationship with like the written word?
I think like, I mean, I was probably like many, if not most writers. I was a pretty big reader when I was a kid. I mean, I've always been a big reader, but then when I was, and probably if you had asked me when I was, well, I guess when I was like 7 or something, I was really into comic books and wanted to be like a comic book artist. And then, but always loved narrative and loved, stories and stuff. But then got into music and playing music when I was like 12. And that really, kind of, that's where my interest was until, through my teens and 20s, really. And then I sort of found my way back to writing. Like I'd always written as a kid, and I knew I was good at writing. I was always good at like writing papers, and I'd written a book when I was like a little kid. I always knew I was like had a facility with it, but I just did music for a really long time. And then at a certain point, I moved to LA and I started writing screenplays with a friend. This was like in my late 20s. And that weirdly was how I sort of got into writing fiction. Was kind of writing screenplays with him. We didn't really sell them anything. We had some like good meetings, like, but we wrote a bunch of screenplays, and I sort of during that time learned how like narrative works, essentially like learned how to pace out a story and tell a story. And then when I went back to school, I got into the creative writing program at UNC, which is really good, and did that. And I was like, oh, I want to actually like write fiction. But it's a very like ass backwards story compared to most people.
Yeah. The name of the podcast is the Chills at Will podcast. I wonder whether it was when you were a kid, more recently, one or the other or both. What are some of the works or who are some of the authors who have given you chills at will, those thrill-inducing authors, those ones you're like, man, I want to be like him, or I know that I can't write anything like him, but I appreciate it, or her, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I'm like, I saw that question on the outline that you sent, and I was like, I was thinking about it. Like, I don't know, as a kid, I feel like you have that experience with books and stories where it's like very transportive, and you read like, I don't know, whatever, like stuff that I'm sure I would think is like horrible now, but like Piers Anthony or something, where it's like, or like C.S. Lewis, or, like the Narnia or whatever, where, just the whole being transported to a different world kind of thing, that I think you maybe lose access to as an adult to an extent, like but in terms of like, I don't know, I'm not answering the question very well.
Okay.
Writers who like, let me take another like run at this. Maybe you can I think maybe edit this however you want, but I was also thinking about, I'm on this group chat with some writers, and we discussed at one point, we sort of we were talking about it sort of became clear, we were through this discussion, that it's like some people are sort of like sentence writers or sentence readers, like people who like really respond to language on a kind of like sentence by sentence or word by word level. And then some of us were like more sort of paragraph writers and readers. And I found that to be kind of an interesting distinction, even if it's like, it's kind of a spurious distinction, because obviously everyone is both a sentence and a paragraph writer. But like, I feel like there's some writers who like really are, like give you chills or whatever on a sort of like pure language level, right? And so like I feel like, maybe someone like Joyce or Saul Bellow or like Barry Hannah, right?
Okay.
Like those, like Barry Hannah's one where it's like I think he's like such a tremendous, he's like a poet, and it's that tremendous like lyrical, so every word is surprising kind of writing. But I think I'm more of like a paragraph writer, and more of a sort of like tend to be drawn more towards like writers of paragraphs, like where the focus is maybe less on the like beauty of language on a word-to-word level, and more on like what the sentences are sort of doing in a paragraph, or what the sort of like rhetorical superstructure of the paragraphs together, and like what a paragraph as a unit kind of can do, versus like sort of attending to like every single word in that kind of the magic of language kind of way. And I feel like someone like, I don't know if you like Joshua Ferris.
Not too familiar.
Yeah, I think he's a lot like that. He's really a master. He's like a good writer, but he's really a master of like sort of rhetorical superstructure in paragraphs, and like making paragraphs that really do things. And I was also thinking of like Charles Portis as kind of a, in contrast with Barry Hannah, and they're sort of thought of, as Southern writers. At the same time, they're thought of in like sort of similarly, but Portis is much more of a kind of like, he begins a paragraph, like you start a Portis paragraph at a certain place and you end at another place, and it's always surprising, so I don't know. So that's just something that when I saw that question, I was thinking about, sort of that distinction, if that makes any sense.
It does. No, I appreciate that. It does. So you talk about the difference between these so-called, sentence writers, paragraph writers. Does that change the way that you edit then? Are you looking at more in a holistic way, a more macro level than a micro?
I think I'm always looking a little bit more on a macro level. Yeah. Like I think there are writers who obsess over like every single word that they write, and I don't feel like I necessarily do that. I want the sentences to be good, but what I'm really interested in is like sort of the unit of thought that the paragraph kind of gets across, and like where the sort of narrative logic goes. And hopefully there's some good language along the way, but like I think when I edit, you edit a book so many times, you wind up like editing, on a word by word level, and in the copy edit phase, you're looking at like every single word. But I think in like the writing of a story or a novel, I'm thinking more about kind of the paragraph level narrative logic than I am like this word, this sort of this sentence as a unit, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
If that, yeah.
Well, it definitely works. I mean, if you may not give yourself as much credit for the sentences. The sentences, there's some beautiful ones in there. There's some like eyebrow raising ones for sure. And obviously there's some sort of alchemy that, like, I mean, an obvious statement, but the paragraphs, like you said, do come from sentences. So whatever it is that you did in the editing, whatever it is that you did in the sentences, they come together, and the result is like, I wish I could say better than just wow.
Oh, thanks.
So I guess a lot of that is the screenwriter in you, right? The idea of placing stories or placing events within the story to make it as powerful as possible.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think this is a really making a generalization, but like in my experience, like with doing an MFA, for example, I think most people who get into like seriously writing fiction do get into it on a like real sort of like language, the beauty of language level, kind of like they're like sort of like where you're coming from with this question. I think they're sort of like transported by language, and they want to make something beautiful, and then maybe they have a facility with that, and then they kind of, if they keep going with it, they have to learn some of the mechanics of like plot, and how to sort of take this beautiful language and these scenes and these the stuff they can do on that level, on a prose level, and sort of turn it into something that tell some kind of story, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think I think learning to write fiction through screenwriting is a little unusual, and I think screenwriting, there's really no beauty in in screenwriting. It's like it's like
Formulaic or
yeah, well, yeah, it is. It's like, I mean, it's that save the cat thing or whatever. It's like, the 8 things that have to happen, and you can kind of like plug. There's the introduction, and the problem, and things change, and the decision, and and most, I mean, not all screenplays are that formulaic, but I do think it's more of a craft. I mean, a lot of screenwriters would disagree with this and be pissed about it, but I think it's more like building a car than it is like making a painting.
Sure,
It's
sure.
you're making something. You're trying to make. I mean, at the height of the form, like Chinatown, it's an art form, but like but really, it's a blueprint for making a piece of art. Right? So there's not really that much aesthetic pleasure in a screenplay. It's like the question is not like how beautiful is this. It's like does the car like run kind of. And so I think I came into fiction more from a like does the car run perspective, sort of. And and yeah, so that I think is with the going back to the paragraph versus sentence thing. It's like paragraphs are sort of like the to me are the unit of like, where is this going, what is this doing, kind of thing. Where is the narrative logic of this going? And
Sure.
Yeah. That's kind of I think that's how it's related to that.
Yeah. I was laughing you on the I'm a Writer But, which is a great duo of Alex and Lindsay. They're a great podcast. And you were talking about, they're kind of pressing you like, what were you reading in your music days? Like, were you reading some like deep stuff? And you said like, I was probably reading like On the Road. I laughed because I did this college program or this teaching program right out of college where we like lived in community, that kind of thing. I think literally like 5 of the maybe like 15 or 20 boys were all reading On the Road. It was like so cliche, like we'd moved away from home and all that. What is there a connection between the music days and your writing?
Yeah, I mean, well, and I wanted to say also, it's funny. I think On the Road is fine, and like, but when we got like somebody got really pissed off at us on Twitter about that. Like,
Oh no!
Really loves On the Road. And I was like, I just pulled that out of a hat. It's like
right,
it's
no
fine.
shade.
It's just whatever. It's like it's a classic of American literature. It's just like it is a sort of stereotypical book for someone in their 20s to read. Totally. But yeah, the connection between music and I mean, I think they're both. Maybe it's like sort of how you learn how to do it. Like, I don't think they're very similar in terms of the art form itself, but in terms of sort of like the way learning how to write music, learning how to play music, and like what that took, and the way that learning from doing that, how the way that like you sort of improve at doing something, and woodshedding, and like I think I learned from that how to get better at writing, that like sort of what like what it requires, and like how much kind of how obsessive you have to be about it. But yeah,
that makes sense. Was there a Eureka moment or Eureka moments where you were like, man, I can do this writing thing? Someone loved your piece, somebody important to you, where you just knew like I'm pretty dang good at this.
I think what I really remember is I kept trying to write a short story, and I think when people get started, and I teach creative writing, and my students often are like, and I don't know if you're also a writer, Peter.
Aspiring, we'll put it that way.
Well, so you'll know what I'm talking about with this. That they're like, I keep writing like the 3 or 4 pages of something, and then it doesn't go, like I can't get it to go anywhere, and I just start over and I write another, and I think that's a very common experience that people
Mhm.
have with it. And it's an experience that I had. And I just remember the first sort of like complete short story that I wrote, where it was a full like 12 pages. You
Mm.
know, it like got a character from one place to another. Something happened. It was a little surprising,
Hmm.
whatever. And I'm sure if I read it now, it would be pretty horrible. And like, it was, I'm sure it was like a real, I think I was reading a lot of, kind of Southern guy lit at that time. So it was probably like very like Larry Brownish or so, very like whiskey, getting, like a bottle of whiskey and like, some like bullshit like that. Don't get mad at me on Twitter. I love Larry Brown, but
That's
but
actually the story I'm writing right now, but whatever, that's cool.
yeah, right.
That
Sorry.
hurts.
No, but yeah, I'm sure it wasn't very good, but I do remember writing that and being like, okay, I can do this. Like
Mhm.
you know, you have to like, and that's why in my in my writing classes, my main objective is to get the students to like write a complete
Sure.
short story, a complete revised short story, even if it's fucking horrible.
Hmm.
It's still, if you do that once, you know that you can do it. That you're like sort of, this is like something that you can do. This is like um, you're sort of allowed to do it. So I
Mhm.
think that's an important like kind of moment.
If you were to go back and read some of your early short stories that were published, not even the one you were just referring to, I mean, could someone see your, I don't know if evolution is the word. I mean, would you see them as different, or if you had pretty much a consistent style?
I think, yeah, I've been, well, it's interesting you asked that, because I've been putting together a short story collection
All right.
to try to take out with the novel that I have a new novel that my agent is reading, and I'm hoping to take out a short story collection with it.
Nice.
Um, yeah, and which I never like sort of put the document together with the short story, but it's like 13 or 14 of my like published stories starting in like 2012, and I think there's definitely a difference. Um, I think the writing is a little bit better. But I think it's like, if it sounds like the same person, it's the same,
Yeah.
it's the same sense of humor, I
Mhm.
guess. And yeah, so I think it's pretty consistent. But then again, I started writing, seriously in my like mid 30s.
Yeah.
So I think like if a more sort of someone with a more kind of like typical, going to like writing since they were in their teens, going to
Mhm.
college, going to an MFA after college.
Mhm.
Like I think there's probably a huge difference between something that you write when you're like early 20s and something you
Yeah.
write when you're, early 30s or whatever.
No doubt.
Uh,
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, what was it like to get published in some of those big magazines? Like, the first one. And I mean, was it like, this is the way it's supposed to be? I know I have some talent, or did you take a moment to be like, dang, this is pretty unbelievable, Granta, or whichever ones?
well, the first one was Mid American Review, which I was still an undergrad, and that was just it's such a hurdle, as you know, as most people who do this know. Just getting that first publication is such a
Mhm.
huge thing. You're like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm in the club now. I've published somewhere.
Yeah.
That's such a monkey off your back. But then, pretty shortly after that, when I went to Cornell to do an MFA, and I got a story in the Paris Review, and
Mm.
that was,
Wow.
yeah, and that was, I don't know. I didn't feel like I deserved it. I mean,
Mhm.
I think that, going back to sort of the music question, like I had this sort of first quasi career as a musician, and
Mhm.
we put out 3 albums, and we toured, and we had like decent management, and whatever. But we, like a story and spin, but we never quite like got over the hump, like, of being consistently like working musicians, of getting like kind of famous at all, or like making it. And we had friends that did make it, and so I think I had the context of that, and seeing that from like the end, like not the other end in the sense of like I'm famous and successful at this, but it's like I had the context of like there's just so much luck and like like talent is part of it, but it's also like the whole thing is like these pursuits are such a crapshoot. And I think if I had gotten in the Paris Review when I was like 22, I would like I'm the fucking shit for sure, and like but I think I had the context to be like, I mean, I worked really hard at this, but like this is really really fucking lucky. And like I tend to think that it's I mean, unless you're like Nabokov or something, it's like luck is more of it than like most people want to admit, I think.
Man, well, it may be a little bit of luck, but I mean, you and George Plimpton, right?
Oh, sure.
Not too bad.
Yeah, me and George. Yeah.
No. How do you seek out stories? Do you seek out stories? Do they just come to you because you're a writer now and they know where to find you? How does that work?
Like, just how do when I write a story, where does it come from? You mean like?
Yeah, maybe that's too general of a question. But I mean, would you say you're someone who like actively seeking them out? Like you're reading the newspaper. I don't know if people read the newspaper anymore. If you're reading the newspaper online, like, right. Oh, this story or this one hasn't been developed, or are you more kind of passive in that?
I'm really not a like get stories from like the news or from like current events kind of. That's just not, I know a lot of people are, that's just not where, for me, how it works. It's more, it's more just kind of, I don't know, how can I describe this? It's a character in a situation. So thinking about a certain type of person, or like getting a flash of a certain kind of character in a particular character in a particular situation. I don't know where it comes from exactly. Maybe like something someone says, or just like a weird train of thought, or thinking about like a colleague or something you heard of, or just real random bullshit like that. But something that your brain snags on, or that my brain snags on, where I'm like, okay, that seems, and for me, honestly, it's sort of like that seems, I think it's usually like where I'm like, oh, that seems like a horrible situation, kind of like, at least for short stories, to me, are like, I think of as like usually as sort of like torture boxes, like
beautifully said. Yes.
In sort of the Flannery O'Connor model, who was a big, sort of early influence of mine. But all her stories are just torture machines, basically. And I've never fully gotten away from that. Like I don't think all short stories have to be like that. But for me, it's thinking of the thing that's compelling is thinking of a particular character in sort of like the worst possible situation for them, because that is immediately there's a tension, and there's an intrigue for me of like, well, I want to know what this person would do, and like put in this pressure, put under this particular pressure.
Definitely. I want to get to the books. I want to ask you one more question. Around your teaching. Maybe it's too general a question, but who are some of the authors and some of the writers whose work is really resonating with your students?
I've been trying, for quite a while. I still do teach some of the like kind of, stodgy classics, like, especially in my intro classes, like I want them to read, Cathedral or whatever, right.
I actually teach that in my high school class. Yes.
Oh yeah. Right. And I do think they should read some of those, those stone cold classics, but I've been branching out more with like the last couple of semesters. I had them get a New Yorker subscription and just read like every news story in the New Yorker. or, just other like sort of new online things. And just for me also, so wasn't just teaching the same kind of
Sure.
like, teaching like whatever the swimmer over and over, but yeah. And so they really, I mean, we read, Aaron Summers and Brandon Taylor both had stories in Joyland.
Nice.
Yeah, and so they really love both of those stories. And I just actually I have a story coming out in Joyland, which I think is like one of the best sort of
Cool.
new, like I'm excited because I feel like with those stories and other ones that I've read, they really are putting out some great stuff.
Yeah.
So shout out to them. But yeah, they really responded to those stories, and there was they hated some of the New Yorker stories, and they loved some. They like really liked some of them. There was a I'm gonna forget. There was a Camille Bordas story they really liked, and there was a I can't remember her name. It's a Argentinian woman about this like these teenagers that go to a lake and get like eaten by wild dogs.
That sounds pretty fun. No,
Yeah.
I have heard of, I do know the author you're talking about. I could not place her name.
Rodriguez, maybe like Angelina Rodriguez or something.
Okay.
I'm probably not getting that right, but they it was a real mixed bag. It was a real mixed bag with some of the new stuff, but it was cool. It's been cool to have them read sort of modern stuff, and where they're responding not just to like sort of the language or the sort of the story craft, but also to the kind of like the cultural relevance, I guess. Like it has like the Brandon Taylor story is about a black guy going to a reading, a queer black guy going to a reading by another queer black guy who he feels like is sort of manipulating the audience in this certain way. And so it's negotiating this cultural stuff that's like very 2021, and like something that they are having to negotiate themselves. And so
Sure.
that's been a really cool experience.
The dirty animal, the filthy animals.
I think it's probably in that book. It's called Prophets is the name of the story.
One of my many to read. I've heard great things.
Yeah.
I mean, shoot, you thought that the Jack Kerouac fans were hardcore. Watch out for the Cheever fans on Twitter. You just talked about the swimmer. Come on now. I mean, hardcore.
I love Cheever. And speaking of like sort of sentence writers, he's like he's really one of the greats. I love Cheever.
No doubt. 2016 was the grand tour.
Mm-hmm.
You had the kind of an odd couple. Sorry for the cliche, but and I guess how much of that book is about art, I guess, or the idea of like kind of selling out, and I'm a literary novelist versus like, okay, people want more gritty stories. Is that a fair reading of? I mean, that's a simplistic one, but is that a pretty strong theme of that book, would you say? Some of the background?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with that book was basically I had kind of failed at music for like 15 years, and I just had this real fear of like never, just like failing at everything my entire life. And so that book was kind of like about a guy who has failed as a novelist, for decades, and then finally, catches a break with something that is, kind of a fabrication. I guess that's a spoiler, but no one's probably going to read that. But
no,
yeah. So I think it is negotiating that, and negotiating of like a fear of, failure and success in an art form.
Well, I was initially reminded of like a Tobias Wolff with like obviously that's an easy connection, but Vietnam vet and trying to find meaning and all that.
Right.
You'd said, I was going to follow up on something about that. How did it feel to have your name on a dang book cover, book jacket? Was that pretty much like, whoa?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, yeah, it's a nice, it's a nice feeling. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't know. It is weirdly anticlimactic in a way
Mm.
when you get the box of books and you open them and you're sort of like, it's very cool on the one hand, but it's also like, okay, like,
Yeah.
you know, now there's this thing that exists in the world, but like, will anyone like read it or care? It's like, so but maybe that's my just my ungrateful neurotic. I don't know. It is really cool. I think the cooler moment is when you get the artwork back from the publisher
Mm.
and you see the thing, especially like Neversink, love. Yeah,
You got a better
nice.
view. Yours is a better
Yeah.
view, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, like love the artwork for that. Tin House does great covers.
Mhm.
Diane Chanette. So yeah, that's the artwork reveal is always really a cool moment for sure.
Do there exist any YouTube like unboxing videos of you out there?
No,
Okay,
I'm
good.
not. Yeah, I did see. I think I saw a guy who did that on Twitter, and I was like, I think this is going to become more of a thing now.
I'm
Which
I'm I'm steeped in like my kids watching YouTube videos with the unboxing, and if I promise you that if I ever publish a book, there will not be an unboxing video.
not you won't do an unboxing.
No, not gonna happen.
Yeah, do they there's like that kid that has like that makes like $3 million a year or something, right? Like,
There are a lot of kids that make $3 million. I probably the one you're talking about is like the rich. Yeah, I mean, yeah, don't get me started.
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's a whole nother world.
Right? It really
Yeah,
is. I mean, even kids are branding themselves now, kind of thing. They have their own brand and any.
you can't start too early. Yeah.
How about this transition I'm about to attempt here and probably fail
Mhm.
in? You talk
Mhm.
about brands. Your brand is that you're the 2020 Edgar Award winner for Best Original Paper. It's a little
That
bit
is a
long.
good
It's a
transition.
little bit
Yeah.
long. It's actually not, but thank you. But you won the Edgar Award, obviously named after Edgar Allan Poe. Um, and when I first knew about the award, I thought maybe it was just for horror. The book, The Hotel Neversink, doesn't. It's not horror, right?
No,
100%.
I
Not at
don't
all.
think so.
Right. But again, I'm steeped in your work, just having finished it this morning, and like, wow, I mean, just an incredible book. The way that you put everything together is incredible. I
Thanks.
wonder where you started. You talked about it being originally short stories. I think they kind of came together. I guess,
Mhm.
I don't want to keep asking the same questions. I guess my question then is like, was there one character who was like, hey, this is the protagonist, or he or she is like the crux of this book? And whether you went backwards or forwards from that, but who that might have been, or.
Well, I think I said this on the I'm a Writer But podcast, and shout out to Alex and Lindsay. But the yeah, I started. It did start as short stories, and I started with the force majeure chapter
Mhm.
with like Len, the Leonard, who is like the son of the matriarch, who at that point it's like the 80s, and they're renting the hotel out to like this policeman's league who comes every April and like kind of destroys it. And that was the first one that I wrote, and I think was like felt like Lynn was kind of I was like, I know that I can write, it's like this is sort of like the decline and fall part. So
Mhm.
I knew that I could write like sort of the him as an adolescent, or like, like this sort of the 1966, like meeting Rachel, becoming a man, kind of chapter. And like that one chapter suggested sort of this entire arc kind
Mhm.
of like right the sort of tragic arc of his character. And
Mhm.
so I think he was immediately felt like the kind of the emotional part of the book, because that arc kind of uh you know echoes the arc of the hotel as
Sure.
well.
Yeah.
So that it just sort of made sense to have him at the center of it. And then I think as I kept writing it, I realized, I wrote the chapter where Alice almost gets killed, where she, and I was like, oh, I need to have her as an adult. And like, and then as I continued writing it, it became clear that sort of what the book was doing was handing the baton off between from Lynn to Alice as kind of the main character. But yeah, I see them as sort of the two principals, you know.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, Alice is not a huge character in the book. I mean, she's not mentioned a lot. She's a second cousin, I want to say. Is that right? To like Lynn?
She's is she a second? I'm so bad with the cousin thing. She is his. No, they're cousins because.
Okay. But she's not
no,
like the,
maybe
she's not the she's not the direct line from Asher, for example.
No,
To Lynn, yeah.
Yeah, her grandfather is Jeannie's brother.
Okay.
So she is his second cousin, I think.
Yeah.
But well, no, I think she is. I mean, she has like 3 or 4 chapters. Like she's a pretty like central character, especially as you know as it goes on.
Right.
But she sort of becomes like the detective kind of
No, I guess I didn't maybe word that too well. I'm not going to argue with the one who wrote it himself, but just as far as her, she's not. I don't know. She's not, again, one of the main line. I think that's really cool that you have that you have that distance, right, where she is kind of an observer.
Yeah.
He hasn't lived Len's life, where Len has been just steeped in the family history. That was just another really light touch that worked really well.
I see what you mean. Yeah, she's an outsider, and she's like she's not sort of in the main kind of like the hotel arc of the book. She stands kind of outside of that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to say Dostoevsky. So Rachel, who again is the wife of, or the ex-wife of Len, she's reading a book, and again, it could be like a throwaway part. None of your book is a throwaway part, but it's not like crucial to the plot. She's reading a book, and she says something like, or thinks, good books are harder to read than bad ones. Good books are harder to read than bad ones. And I thought about that in terms of your book. Your book is not just good, it's great, but it was an easy read. And I mean that in the best sense of the word. Everything was so smoothly done. It wasn't one where, it was definitely highbrow, but it wasn't one where you need to look up a million words. But it was just beautifully written. You talked about your sentences. I thought they were incredible. There was one that, again, could have been like a throwaway part. It's with Javits, and he I think it was Javits. He's sleeping off a drunk, maybe, or was that Sander?
I'm not sure. Sander's the bartender. Javits is the hotel detective.
So one of the characters is sleeping off a drunk, and he gets up in the morning and says, "Dead legs that eventually began waking to the irrefutable fact of the day." So good.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. It's the mundane. That's happened to all of us, right? Like, oh man, I can't even get up right now. And then it's like, then you take a shower, you just get walking, and it's irrefutable. What are you gonna do?
Right.
Sun's out. Let's go. So there's just a lot of that good writing in there for sure.
Thanks, man.
The idea, this is a Jewish family and their history. Could it have been written about a Greek family or a Japanese family? Like, did it need to be Jewish? What was the background on doing, like the Catskills and that tradition there?
Right. I think that it had to be Jewish because I wanted to write about the Catskills. I was living in Ithaca, New York at the time, and we spent some time in the Catskills. I became interested in the history of the Catskills. I, at the same time, got to be friends with an older guy who was from Brooklyn and who had gone to like Grossinger's in the Concord, as a boy in the 50s and, 40s through 60s or whatever. And then as he became an adult and a parent, he took his kids there. And like, he was the one, he told me the story when they were going to Grossinger's in the 80s about the policemen coming and like trashing the hotel. So that was from him, that was from his story he told me. And so I was just sort of fascinated by it as a phenomenon and as a kind of a little bit of a metaphor for sort of the American empire, or the kind of the, which is not a huge thing in the book, but I think it's there, like the sort of like the 20th century, it kind of mimics the, the post, the sort of the rise during the 20s through 40s, post-war boom, and then the kind of like the malaise of the 70s and 80s, and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. So it felt like it had to be about the Catskills, and then if it's going to be about the Catskills, it has to be about Jewish people, which
Mm-hmm.
which I am not. So that's always a tricky thing to do. And I hopefully I did it. Mostly the reaction has been like positive by people who are Jewish and grew up in the Catskills, and
Right.
I've gotten mostly just like positive response from it. So
Very meaningful compliments, I'm sure. Yeah.
yeah, very, very much. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you do it with such a light touch. I mean, you don't hit us over the head with trauma and pain, but I mean, obviously it needs to be mentioned. There, I think it was Sander who was probably wasn't. He talked about the camps
Mm-hmm.
and and escaping Eastern Europe, and obviously doing justice to the tragic history of the Jews in the 20th century and beyond.
Right.
But it's also universal. I don't want to sound corny saying that, but it really is. It's a family story.
Yeah, I know. I think you're right. Like in one sense, it could have been a Greek family or a Japanese family or whatever. Like I don't think you need to be like super interested in
Mm-hmm.
the like Jewish immigration, the story of like Jewish immigrants or whatever, because I think that the family themes that I think that it deals with, like expectations and the weight of like previous generations and so on, is as you say, is a universal thing. But
Mm-hmm.
then the particulars are the Catskills and
Right.
Jewish traditions.
Yeah, yeah. The idea of like sacrificing for success and the immigrant story for sure. Like hoping the next generation does better than I do, whatever better happens to mean.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously starting with Asher, there's some pretty horrible things to say the least that he did to kind of to move ahead or whatever you want to say.
Right.
There's the Balzac quote that starts off The Godfather, the epigraph about behind every great fortune there's a crime.
A crime. Yeah,
Is that a simplified reading of the book a little bit too? About, do you really wanted to delve into like there's always something below the surface, even in this great success supposedly?
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the kind of the basis of it, I guess. Is right, like that. He sort of that the patriarch and his family undergo sort of like unimaginable hardships in order to create this like this this thing and this legacy, and this fortune, but that that what they have to do in order um to create it ultimately destroys it, which it is, as you say. I think that that's a very it's not the first time it's been done you know
Sure,
um
sure.
in a novel or a movie or whatever. But yeah, it's it felt right.
That mule, man,
Mule, yeah. Mule,
man.
mule hoof.
Did you? I'm serious in the question. Did you have to do any research? Like, I mean, mule is edible, and you can make mule sausages and the whole deal.
Yeah, you
Okay.
can. And I think there's even, I looked into like boiling mule hoof, and like what,
Wow.
which I think is like becomes like kind of this gluey,
Okay. Yeah.
gelatinous thing, but sounded really disgusting.
Let's see your Google searches right from that time you're writing the
Yeah,
book,
right.
man. So Asher is the patriarch, the ghostly figure, if you will. Not trying to give stuff away. Even if I were to give away the whole book, people would still want to read it because I just can't do justice in describing it. Just like I said, the alchemy that you were able to put together is incredible. But it's this
Thanks.
idea of like the next generation, and I think it was Asher who called them softest cream,
Oh yeah, the
right?
well, it's Genie. Yeah, that they're all, the children are all like
Yes.
soft. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's very
Yeah.
interesting, and I think all of us can relate to that, whether immigrants or not. Um, you got to be a comedian. One of the things that I really appreciate about your book is that they're like stories within stories. You had to write copy, if you will, as a comedian,
Mhm.
right? You wrote you had to kind of talk about Alice as a writer and kind of what she wrote about. You didn't necessarily write, share in the book what her passages and stuff, but I wonder
Right.
about all the different voices that you had to take on, all the different people, whether
Mhm.
writing, the comedy for Joey,
Right.
or, each chapter with a different person. How did you, in such a way, how did you keep everything together, kind of unified as much as possible? Or was that not the point?
Mm, I I don't. I mean, I think like as many different sort of voices as I tried to do, there's it's like there's a unifying sensibility, probably, that's just my sensibility and my sense of humor essentially. But yeah, I did enjoy doing a bunch of different, as you say, there's like the one chapter that's sort of the comedian who's having a breakdown on stage. And uh,
That was some
um,
definite laughs there. Wow. Dark laughs for sure. Dark laughter, but man, that was funny.
yeah, that was fun to write. That was fun to sort of research old like vaudeville comedy and kind of I'm gonna blank on some of the names of some of the comedians that I looked up. Old footage where just like kind of stole a lot of like old jokes,
Yeah.
um, and just the general style. That was fun to write. And then like the Javits thing is like he's the hotel detective, and he sort of has like, I guess you would say he has like really really horrible ADD, kind of like he has like the world's worst case of ADD, and is like the last person on earth who should be a hotel detective
Right.
probably,
Right.
because he can't like concentrate on anything. So his chapter is just sort of this like single paragraph, just kind of like stream of consciousness.
Mhm.
And that was, it was just really fun to kind of find the find the right mode for each character.
Yeah.
um, I think those ones are more extreme than I think a lot of the
Sure.
other ones were, just sort of like somewhat more standard kind of story narrative for third or first person. But it did feel like I was trying to find sort of the way in on you know
Was that the so-called Borch belt?
Borscht Belt. Yeah,
Kind of the
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
idea that like the comedian like run that certain
right,
tour they would do through the Catskills and stuff.
yeah, yeah,
Oh man, the whole time I was thinking of like Henny Youngman from like Goodfellas.
right. Oh yeah, right, right,
Take
right.
my wife, please.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Shecky Green. Yeah,
Right, right. Totally, totally.
yep.
Um, one of the unifying themes is this idea of like not forgetting, and do you make yourself happy and push yourself away, whether you physically move away. People who live through the horrors of the Hotel Neversink, and the main thing that I haven't mentioned yet is the disappearance of Jonah Schonenberg, which starts off the book,
Mhm.
and then disappearance of others in subsequent years through the hotel, this cavernous, city in its own, really.
Right.
Um, and I want to say Noah, maybe is that the right name? He's the grandchild of Jeannie,
Yes, right.
right? So he has a relationship with Alice where they get together and where they talk, and she's basically saying like, "You're happy, but what are you pushing aside?" And then he talks about
Yeah.
his dreams and all of that. It's not horror, but there is that little bit of that shadow, there's that light, there's that something nipping at your heels, like there's
Mhm.
more going on here, with the obvious thing about the disappearances.
Right.
Did the horror part, did the light horror part come easily to you? Did the mystery, I guess is the best word, that come easy to you?
Not really. Like I mean, I wrote it as a linked story collection at first, and I kind of didn't. It maybe had a little bit of like the child abduction, like darkness thing, but hadn't I hadn't conceived of it that way. And my agent was like, "You need to make this more. This sort of like the spine of the book needs to be. We need to sell like this. You need to make this into more of a novel
Mm-hmm.
than a collection of linked stories. And the way to do that is to like make the murders or the abductions be like sort of the through line.
Mm-hmm.
So the writing of the book was kind of the process ultimately of like figuring out that through line, and who the murderer is, and the way, and sort of um making that a more central concern, I guess, of the novel without making it like cheeseball, I guess.
Sure.
Like, and what I found was that, and I think I've talked about this. I can't remember when I've talked about this before, but I tried a lot of different ways of like incorporating the murder stuff and the kind of horror element that you're talking about. And I just found like I tried writing little interstitial chapters from the killer's perspective, and like I walk through the hall, whatever, like, blood dripping from, like just, like just corny stuff, like stuff that like I kept trying to play with it and find these different ways of doing that. And it just felt corny no matter which way I did it, and just having the killer in it felt corny. It felt like, and I don't think that's always true. Like, I think you can have books that have a killer in them or have stuff from the killer's perspective. I just couldn't figure out how to do it in this that didn't feel heavy-handed and like cheap in some way. And just what I found was that the less it was in there, the better. That sort of, as you said, that having it as kind of this shadow thing, this like this sort of shadow that like it sort of plays like on every story, like has like just like a touch of this shadow that kind of comes in, or this thing that appears for a moment, or something that a character hears, or just that it's this like the book is almost like in denial about it, right? Like
That's true.
And I think it is a book that's one of the themes is that it is sort of about denial, and Lynn's in denial, and like the genie's in denial, and the hotel, the family is in denial about their culpability in this thing that's happening, and these children that are disappearing. So it feels like it ultimately felt, I think, like a very form following function thing to have the book itself be in a kind of like denial about this thing that's happening,
Right. No, definitely not heavy-handed. To quote you, quoting, I guess, popular wisdom, I'm not sure who said it first. It's always scarier before the monster shows itself.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
Right.
Like, once you see the monster, it's, it's kind of over. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there's some great writing. There's you write about dreams as, quote, wispy contours already fleeing like a tattered ghost. Henry, I think earlier on in the book, writes, he thinks it's that I know better than to turn around before he is gone. And, when you know what happens later on, and as the book adds up, they mean more.
Right.
And then, of course, go ahead.
No, well, yeah, just I think it's dread, I guess, is the like that. It's trying to create a like slowly building sense of dread, which I love. I'm a horror fan. I love horror movies, and I like all kinds of horror movies. Well, I don't really like slasher movies, but like but like but I love horror movies that are like sort of dread based, like the kind of Japanese horror movies, or the like I feel like Midsummer was sort of like that, like just that kind of building like sense of like something is not right, to me is more interesting than the sort of like monster jumping out of the closet,
Right. The pace is definitely not the same, but an Uncut Gems kind of thing. Did you happen to see that movie? Yeah. Well, something's going to happen every minute. In that case, it's much more fast paced.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's just like tension, just ratcheting the tension to 10 and keeping it at 10 the entire time.
Exactly. Without giving the context, I was backing up a little bit, telling my wife like, hey, this needs to be a movie. It would be such a great movie, talking about the Hotel Neversink. But with outside of context, this will be on the poster possibly. The only way forward, it seemed, was down. Right. Which was very literal in this book, with the basement and such, and was also very, very metaphorical. Are you familiar with Where You're Going, Where Have You Been? The Joyce Carol Oates.
Oh yeah. I teach that sometimes.
I remember reading that and being scared in a different way. Just my teacher taught it to us as the guy being like the devil or representative of the devil, and just like not fitting. Like I remember his shoes were ill fitting, and
Oh
he was
yeah.
kind of a shadow and didn't really look comfortable in his skin, and and that kind of stuff. And I was reminded a lot of that in a positive, in a very good way in your book. Just the shadow and the light, and they could kind of see the guy, but not really. And I just thought that
Yeah.
it works so well with the not being able to quite see the monster, but it's still scary. It's the
Oh,
dread.
thank you. Yeah, and I love, man, I love that story, and I love, yeah, Arnold Friend is definitely
The
like
Arnold
one of,
friend, yes.
yeah, an old friend or an old fiend, right? And
Uh-huh.
and yeah, like you say, the for people who don't know that story, it's like this teenage girl is kind of like confronted by this guy who, presents as a teenager, but it's like the
Sure.
longer that she looks at him, the more that it's like something is not right. Like
Yeah.
he's like short, but he's like stuffed newspapers into his boots, and he's got like grease paint dripping down his face. It's really one of the scariest stories ever written.
It is.
Yeah, just the sort of like the uncanniness and the kind of the sort of the wrongness, like the slowly sort of this slowly dawning realization that something is wrong,
No doubt.
yeah.
No doubt about it. Towards the end, Alice, who we talked about, she goes back and forth, and there's some positivity in her life for sure, but she talks about life as being meaningless in many ways. She had some horrible traumas early in life, to say the least. There's a lot in the book about time and its slipperiness. Where Len's looking back and it's like, that would seem like it was just yesterday when it was something that was 30 years ago, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And great quotes about Lenny as, quote, history's janitor, kind of cleaning up. And again, like we talked about, family secrets, those things
Right.
that have not been said and maybe need to be said. So it is definitely not a happy ending to the book, but I would say
Right.
that you could maybe see, again, positive is maybe too strong of a word, but you can see some positivity in that need to dig.
Yeah,
You know?
I think it's sort of a happy ending in a way.
Okay.
It's like, I mean, it's not a happy ending for like the Sikorskys or their family legacy or the hotel,
Right.
but it's a happy ending for Alice kind of becomes the main character, and she, I mean, she sort of, I mean, in like sort of cheap psychological terms, she kind of achieves, resolution through destroying the hotel, essentially. Um, and so in that sense, I feel like it's sort of is like the hotel kind of deserves to be destroyed,
Sure. Sure.
and what happened deserves to be uncovered. So it's like, it's I guess it's both things. It's unhappy for Lynn, but I think it's like sort of happy for her,
And Len is definitely a lovable character,
Yeah.
likable to say the least. I love how the title is kind of got a verb in there, I guess, or the Neversink, like, or an adjective, like the syntax of it, I guess. The never sinking hotel. Nope, it's the Hotel Neversink. The
Right.
title just works, and whether it's a happy ending or not, I guess is up to the reader. But I definitely leave the book thinking. Not making this up. I put the book down just maybe 2 hours ago, and I was going to get something else. And next to the book is sitting one of my kids' flashlights.
Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah, not making
Yeah.
that up. Stuff just gets all over the place. Who knows what they're.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know that I'll ever look at that flashlight the same way.
Oh,
It's
good.
definitely.
I've ruined flashlights for you. That was the goal.
No, just that particular flashlight. So
Okay.
you at home need to read that book. You will find out about the flashlight and all this good stuff. A question that you may love or may hate: what's next? I don't know how much you want to talk about the short story collection and the novel coming out.
Well, the short story collection is, it's just a short story collection, I guess. But the novel is a mystery. It's another mystery. It's maybe more of a little bit of a conventional mystery, I think. Like, not, I don't know. I mean, I think it still is playing with form, and it's not, it's not, it's another like literary mystery or whatever, like that kind of, that's an annoying phrase, but I guess that's what you would call it. But I think it's a little bit more sort of, there's a criminal or possible criminal and a detective, so it's more of a sort of detective novel. But yeah, that hopefully that will go on market towards the end of this year, go on submission. So we'll yeah.
That's awesome. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you in your lab where I assume you get some of your writing done, if not all of it. Are you listening to some of your band's music when you're writing? Are you listening to classical? What's the soundtrack when you're writing, or is it just dead silence?
Dead fucking silence. Yeah, I can't. I'm one of those people that I can't write or think if there's like any music at all. I guess if there's kind of classical or jazz, maybe I could write to, although I still prefer silence. But when I hear about people who write to like music with singers, I don't know how people do that.
Right, right. maybe some Coltrane like Len was listening to.
Yeah, maybe that, but yeah, I can't. I really prefer dead silence if at all possible.
That makes sense. Pleasure to read your work. And again, like I said, to be able to talk to the artist himself is pretty awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. I hope having listened to some of your previous stuff, I know maybe some of the questions were repetitive, but really enjoyed talking to you, and I wish you great luck in the future.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was really fun.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for listening to episode 77 with Adam O'Fallon Price. You can now subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, and please leave a 5-star review. You can also ask for it by name using Alexa and find it on Stitcher, Spotify, and on Amazon Music. You can follow on Instagram, where I'm at Chills at Will Podcast, or on Twitter, where I'm at Chills at Will PO1. And by the way, Adam is definitely, what do they say? Constantly online. What's the expression?
Very online.
Very online, right? Twitter, easy to find that way.
Unfortunately, yes, I'm there.
And you were dumping a little bit on the I'm a Writer Bud on your website, but your website is very, very user friendly, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad you think so. I need to update it.
So check him out there as well. You can watch this episode and other episodes on YouTube. Subscribe to the Chills at Will podcast channel. This is a passion project of mine, a DIY operation, and I love for your help in promoting what I'm convinced is a unique and spirited look at an often ignored art form. The intro song for the Chills at Will podcast is Wind Down, and the other song played on the episode is Hoops. Both are instrumentals, the second by Matt Whitehour, and both songs are used through archesaudio.com. I'm excited to share my next episode with Matt Sullivan, former editor at Bleacher Report and author of the recent Can't Knock the Hustle, Inside the Season of Protest, Pandemic, and Progress with the Brooklyn Nets Superstars of Tomorrow. I hope you can tune in. The episode drops on September 10th. For now, thanks again for listening, and I hope that these quarantine days bring you texts like those from Adam O'Fallon Price, writers like him with mad skills, including the Hotel Neversink, whose work gives you chills at will.